So we're going to move on to the next session, which is will medical journals survive, even thrive in the 21st century? A very serious discussion. And we have 3 panel members, and I've asked Joey Lapena to join us as well, so making it 4 panel members. And I'm also involved in the panel. And if we could have them please come up to the stage. Virginia Barbour again, Ginny Barbour, Joey Lapena, Gerald Holtmann, and Vanessa McDonald. Where's Vanessa? Here she comes. And I'll introduce the new people in a moment when they're up here. Can we please have microphones for the group up here? Where are the microphones?
Yeah. Yeah, there's a step.
Emad. Oh, Emad, you're up here as well. Come and join us. Come and join us, Emad. I'm sorry, I've made a mistake here. No, I'm completely misreading. Joey, you stay here as well. Don't you leave.
All right.
I'll give these to you guys. All right, so we're going to start off, and I hope that we'll get audience engagement. If we don't, we'll have an early lunch. That'll be good. But I'm hoping there'll be audience engagement because this is a very serious issue. Just think about it. Just think about it as the consumer. What do you want in terms of academic output? What do I look for in terms of academic output? Do I care if my article is in an issue of a journal? And I would argue I couldn't care less. I could not care. I'm going to be provocative. I could not care less. I just want my paper published as quickly as possible, in the best place possible, that will have the biggest impact possible, that will be read by the most people possible, that will change health and medicine if it's worthwhile, possibly. That's what I want. Do I care about where it gets published? Only because I want to ensure that those things are met. That's the only reason I care about these things. As a consumer, forget the editor, as a consumer. As an editor, what do I want? I want the best articles in my journal, in my issues, appearing every 2 weeks or 4 weeks or whatever they are. And I want to have those journals read, cited, impactful, changing things. That's what I want as an editor. But they're not the same thing. Not really. And we have all these challenges. Paper mills. We just heard about this, a huge challenge. Fake science. Bad research, really bad, should never be published, even in a good journal, but sometimes that happens. How do we guard against that? So all of these issues are there. And then there are how many journals in the world? Think about it. How many journals are there? We need great national journals. I would agree with that. We need great journals internationally that cover the spectrum. We need both. But do we need the thousands and thousands and thousands of journals that we have? And let me challenge you to say, why do we have so many? Do we really need those? Do they make a difference? And should we be thinking about what to do about that? So I really would be very interested to have the panel cover this. So you've already met Joey, who's a former editor, former vice-chancellor, knows all about institutions and academia, and is really very, very, very qualified to be on this panel. Ginny Barbour, the editor of the Medical Journal of Australia, you've met. Gerald Holtmann, who's the director of gastroenterology at the Princess Alexandra Hospital in Brisbane, Queensland, a distinguished academic, highly published, highly impactful, a consumer, as well as someone who's driven research and research groups. Very appropriate. Vanessa McDonald, Professor of Nursing here at the University of Newcastle, one of the really most impressive researchers in asthma in the world, absolute leader in the world of research in asthma, and again, another person who knows all about consuming journals and publishing in journals. And then Emad El Omar, a distinguished editor of Gut. So we have a great panel here of editors, consumers, academics, leaders, and what we want to hear is, well, should we have journals? Should they survive? Or should we get rid of them? What are we going to do? What's going to happen? And what's the future? And Gerald's going to start off.
Nick, can I challenge this to start with? Whatever we heard so far was about processes. Therefore, there's something which is done to manage academic outputs, manuscripts, how to process them, how to panelize if they're paper mills. But I think we really need to rethink and ask, what is our product, what is our value proposition, and where are our stakeholders? Because I heard 20 times, if I counted correctly, the academics. But the academics are only one part of the business. Essentially, all this is being not paid by the universities, this is paid by the community, by the taxpayers, by the people. And therefore, the journals, where is their value proposition that they serve the different stakeholders, which are the academics, which is the industry, which is the community, and the governments who pay via the universities.
So what do the editors think? Ginny, why don't we start with you, and then Emad.
Okay, well, so I want to just turn it slightly. One of the things I think the question that we're trying to address is, how do we disseminate medical knowledge? So if you type any medical term into Google, what site comes up first? It's not the MJA, usually. It's Wikipedia. It's Wikipedia. It's Wikipedia. And you can try it now yourself. And so how many, if we're talking about real readership, how does it compare? So your average thesis has probably been read by your panel, you, your parents, and maybe about, I don't know, 10 other people. It's true, isn't it? Your average research paper is probably read, maybe downloaded a few hundred times if you're lucky, 1,000 times, very lucky. The average Wikipedia page is downloaded millions of times. There are tens of millions of views of Wikipedia every day. Highly valued pages are read thousands of times per day. So you have to ask the question, if we really want to disseminate knowledge, really efficiently, why do we have journals? Why are we not just putting it all on Wikipedia? And I'll do one more thing to that, which I can see the faces in the room going sort of slightly panicked attack with Wikipedia. How many people here have edited Wikipedia? Who's read Wikipedia? Okay, who's edited Wikipedia? We should all be editing Wikipedia. I'm absolutely serious about that. So that's my kind of provocation.
And we actually had discussions when I was editor of the MJA with Wikipedia.
We did indeed.
Remember, I think you were engaged with that as well before you became the editor. So we've had those discussions. So that is a really valid point that we need to make. And I think you're right. Wikipedia is pretty good at some of the information dissemination if you read it carefully. Most of it's not bad. Let's hear from Emad first before we get to you, Gerald.
So I'm interested in the truth. I want evidence base that is going to be impacting on healthcare, ultimately. And that applies to healthcare, it also applies to science, applies to any other discipline of knowledge, of human knowledge. So to a great extent, I want a very rigorous approach to providing that evidence base and that truth. And the current system of having the journals and the external peer review and the very kind of rigorous way of assessing, at least there's a process of assessing the quality and relevance of this work, and hopefully also picking out any aberrations that suggest foul play. If we abandon this and we say, well, why don't we just put it all in a repository somewhere and everybody can read it and make up their own mind? I worry about this, because then that is open to so much manipulation and so much potential fraud that there is no regulation of this. And to a great extent, I think having the current system is not perfect, but at least it's one opportunity, one tool to ensure that a measure of rigor has been applied to what we dish out and put out to the public and to the consumer.
Gerald.
Emad,
And Vanessa.
I think everybody will agree what you just said. And isn't this ultimately about the value proposition of a journal? That this value proposition ensures the quality, and Wikipedia may not have the same level of quality assurance, but it's widely available, has a different value proposition. But the medical journals need in the future much stronger emphasize the value proposition, because this is the only way they can survive in this environment where Wikipedia is readily available. But the consumer doesn't know what the value is, and a lot of consumer may rely on Wikipedia because they don't know it.
It's not just Wikipedia. What about preprint servers, which hasn't been quite mentioned yet, mentioned earlier today? I mean, you can get your paper, you know, up on a preprint server. You know it's got ethics approval. If it gets up on the preprint server, they check at least that aspect. Sure, there's no peer review, but you could argue, well, it's still appearing, it's citable, it's available, it can be looked at, they can be followed up. There could be post-peer review like F1000's model. So is that the future? Vanessa?
Yeah, so I really agree about the verification and the quality of the evidence that's being published, and then we're using these platforms, for example, for consumers to look at the research. So maybe journals need to actually think about where they're placed, and the question was, will journals survive or even thrive in the 21st century? So we're now a quarter way through the 21st century. And if we think about what things were like in the year 2000 versus what they're like today, they're unrecognisable, I would say. So I think what's really important is that we give, or that journals look at how consumers consume information. And why don't the journals be part of that process? And, you know, looking at, say, in 2024, one way to do that is with the visual abstracts, with the video abstracts, etc., where someone can click on a link and look at a couple of minutes and get the picture of the paper. But we also need to be thinking, I think, far ahead. So in 2024, we need to be thinking about, well, how will consumers consume knowledge in 2035 and 2040, and be able to actually have the journals adapt very early in the process to be able to predict that consumption of knowledge.
Let me ask about trust in what we produce. Do you believe, I'm asking the panel, do you believe our current model is acceptable for trust? And then how do you deal with issues around, well, what about inadequate peer review, even in good journals? What about Nature and Lancet and other journals publishing lousy papers which have had to be retracted or whatever, despite having rigorous processes? How do we justify or how do we defend the trust issue in the 21st century for journals, our standard journals? Comments? Joe?
Yeah, okay. Before the trust issue, and related to it actually, let me take a poll. How many of you, aside from your own journals, how many of you have read another journal, medical journal, cover to cover recently?
Cover to cover.
Cover to cover.
Hands up. I can't put my
Okay,
hand
1, 2. You see, the consumer today no longer takes home the new copy of the journal and looks through everything from the cover to the special sections of the journal, through the articles. The consumer today enters a keyword online and retrieves a title and an abstract. And if the abstract is interesting enough, tries to download the full text. Unfortunately, a high-impact journal is usually paywalled. So for a low and middle-income country consumer, like most of my colleagues, that's out of the question. So even before we talk about trust, there's accessibility to research. Now, you wonder why people resort to easy access articles, including what we might consider fake news, because it's available. But when they circulate fake news, hopefully, there's a check and balance involved. People call it out. People use Snopes or other fact checkers. And then there's a sort of review process that goes on, I'd like to think. But back to our question now, trust, and we're talking about scientific articles, clinical material that can be used and useful for our patients and their communities. We would like to think that our journals are the repositories and the vanguards of such articles. But in the 21st century, does that really happen?
I think it's a very good question. Let me ask the panel. Vanessa first, then Ginny, please.
Yeah, I think the trust is a major issue today and will be going forward. due to the AI technology that we have today, so for a couple of things, you know, peer reviewers using AI technology to actually do reviews, which is
Terrible.
which is terrible, and I don't know anyone personally that would do that, but the possibility is there. And I think the other thing that was mentioned earlier was around the peer review process, and from a couple of perspectives, like as an associate editor, there's papers that I'll send out to 15 different people before I finally get enough reviewers to review a paper. So it comes to the quality of that review then, as Nick suggested. But I guess the other thing is around trying to get people to review the papers, then what are you ending up with in terms of the trust in that review? And that becomes very difficult, I think. And the other thing is, I guess, and you mentioned it, Nick, I get an email a day at least asking me to review a paper. So if we're going forward with this same system, how do we actually cope with that within the future?
I think they're great points. I don't think the system is coping. I'm not sure what others see, but I'm seeing a real degradation of peer review. And that's my impression. I don't have any data. Haven't done a scientific study, but anecdotally, that's what I'm seeing. And I'll be honest, I can't peer review all the articles I'd like to for the good journals that ask me that I would normally have said yes to, because the volume's increased. And I'm just one person. I think everybody's feeling this. So we have a problem. We actually have a real problem, and we haven't solved it. Our current system is a problem. I'll come back to AI, though. I'd like to talk about that. Ginny, though, comments?
Yeah, so on the trust issue, I think we have to kind of understand that trust is on a continuum. So we know that peer review is a highly flawed process. You know, any of us who are editors here, you know, you send a paper out for peer review. This happens to me every single week. You'll get the reviews back. One reviewer will say minor revision, one will say accept, and one will say reject. You know, and that happens all the time, doesn't it? So peer reviewers disagree, and there are 3 people out of, you know, however many billion people there are in the world that could review it, that have their views on it. So I think our job as journals is to, we're not the arbiters of truth. We're doing our best to curate, and curate is the word that I use. We're trying to improve papers as far as we can for publication, and then we present them to the public, and they need to understand what, at that point, how to then judge it. And I think this came out in the pandemic when with medRxiv, there was this a sort of, everybody was horrified about the idea that the stuff was coming out on medRxiv that was during the pandemic, and there was a worry about a degradation in trust. Actually, that did not happen. What you found was that papers would get reported in the newspapers, and they'd say, this was a preprint that was published. And so, okay, you're setting up a marker that says, you know, read this with caution, understand what you're looking at. And I think really what we have to do is to kind of educate the public and, you know, ourselves generally about what trust means in the sort of medical journal sphere at this point.
Thank you, Ginny. Gerald?
With regard to trust, I had to reflect about your presentation, and there was a gap. And the gap is when I submit a paper with a junior colleague, I always look at the editorial board. Who might be the person where this paper goes to? And then the question is this a person who may have an interest? If he doesn't have an interest, there's no conflict of interest. But is what we are proposing with the paper in conflict with his belief system? And I think this is a major problem. And this person then will get the help of reviewers who have the same belief system, and there's no check and balance of this review process. And I think there's, on the one hand, the challenge to improve the management of conflict of interest in the editorial process, but equally in the review process. And ultimately, I think it can only be addressed by having a value system and evaluating the quality, and that you actually have a ranking of reviewers, which is probably not only just within one journal, but you have a different tier system of reviewers, and if you are a high-performing reviewer, which really puts time, effort into this, that this is recognized, and the recognition of society is typically that you're being paid for it. It's very provocative, but I think it's important for the value of the journal.
Any other comments from the panel? Emad, do you want to say something?
Yes, I mean, I think I'll address Gerald's and the question of trust. I mean, there isn't a definitive, clear answer about this, but at least you do your best. I mean, that's life. You just have to, nothing is absolute. And I think certainly the approach with our journal is that we all sign up, all the associate editors and the team sign up to getting the most robust story out, so, and with fairness, okay? Now, of course, again, I mean, that's not a perfect thing, but the idea is that it has gone through a fair assessment. And that includes declaring conflict of interest. So if an associate editor, for example, says, I don't want to handle this one because of such and such, we respect that and we try and seek, another associate editor or reviewers that have been rated. Actually, we do have a rating system. And it's not just how quick they are in terms of, providing reviews, but the quality of the reviews. So and that's actually maybe a good strategy for other journals that struggle with getting external peer review, is that cultivate that trustworthy, very valuable complement of reviews that you can rely on, certainly in an emergency. If somebody lets you down and they've been 3 months before they send you the review, so you can call upon them, and the reward is recognition either by being on the editorial board or what. I mean, there's ways of rewarding them, but that's the best that we can do. I think it's just you manage that because you believe in all collectively that we're trying to get this robust story that has been assessed fairly.
All right, so any questions from the audience, please? Any comments or questions? Kitchu, Nair, Professor Nair, and James. Can we give one microphone? Can I take one microphone away? And can we please... Thank you. Over here.
Thank you, panel. You mentioned paid peer review, and do you trust them?
So I'm familiar with this because as a junior researcher, I did a lot of reviews for very top, top journals like The Lancet and others that do expedited review. And for that expedited review, you'll provide the review within 3 or 5 days or whatever. So to some extent, you may well get a very high quality review, and there's maybe a financial incentive. For my own journal, we do have a fast-track review process, but it doesn't compensate. There's no money for the reviewer, but we pay money for a charity. So it's a kind of opportunity to be altruistic, to say if you deliver the review within, usually within 5 days, the publisher will donate a certain amount of money to either your charity or a declared charity for the publishing group. And that's one way of actually, covering that aspect. But I mean, and this is a very hot question for debate, is whether you should pay reviewers to try and solve the problem of lack of reviewers. I don't know. This is an untested hypothesis, and I think we need to kind of find out what the quality is and how fair it is. Yeah.
Ginny, you want to make one quick comment, and then we'll pass it to the next question?
Yeah. So I think there are times when paying for peer review is appropriate. So, for example, for methodological review, when you're not asking people to review within their discipline, that can be very valuable. Can I just say that I think what we really need to do is to value the peer review and provide ways of people being able to use their peer review in the incentive systems they do in their university. So I think it's much more about making sure they get recognised for it. That's a kind of, payment in kind that I think we don't yet do enough of.
James, a question.
I hope this question comes out succinctly. This is about delivery mechanisms, because I think the popularity of Wikipedia is, to me as a consumer, suggests to me that because it's edited all the time, that it's the latest information. When I Google search for an article, I do not know whether that's the latest research. And the problem with AI is that the training of the AI model doesn't mean that the knowledge is the latest knowledge. And with optimization of Google, you don't know that the latest research is at the top. So Wikipedia is a good starting point for some knowledge. And Nick, I'm glad that you said you were part of the conversation with Wikipedia to see if you can get involved. But how do journals then make sure they are part of the conversation? Because it's just too much out there when AI is not yet trained enough to be able to summarize and trust what the latest information is, so that as a consumer researcher, we know to trust the latest research.
Of course, the problem with Wikipedia is you don't know who's edited it and what their bias or perhaps direction has been. So sometimes that editing is incorrect. I've seen that on Wikipedia, where the information is actually wrong, plain wrong, and that's an issue that you just can't deal with if you're not an expert in the field. But I'll ask for the panel's reflection. Gerald first.
I think your question is very much aligned with this long-term perspective of any journals. And if we just try to forecast at the moment, the big commodity which is used for free by AI is knowledge. And this knowledge is not validated. The knowledge has not been undergone a review process. But if I reflect what journals do, they create knowledge which is validated. And if you think about AI in the future, you could envision an AI subtype which is relying 100% on validated knowledge. And the value proposition then is that journals provide this commodity at a premium, and this is how the system could work.
Jeff, please.
Thanks, Nick. Jeff Scher from Internal Medicine Journal in Australia. I'd like to thank the panel for tackling an impossible topic. You've done it very well, and it's impossible. I'd like to ask one question which has perhaps not been addressed, and that's the issue of first-rank journals expanding the field of journals with their second and third level journals themselves. I happen to think this is a good idea, because the trust issue that we're talking about in our premium vehicles tends to run over into both the quality of the papers and the review process. But I'm wondering what you think about that. Lancet's done it, Blood's done it, New England Journal's done it, among many others, I'm sure.
Emad.
So thank you. Very, very interesting question. And I can answer from our own journal. So there was a flagship journal which has got, and it was very clear that, with an acceptance rate between 6 and 8%, you really are letting down a lot of people with some really, really high quality work, just because you have to maintain a certain space that you're allowed to publish. I mean, there's a budget that is involved in the publishing. But there's a lot of high quality work that could definitely be handled by the same methodology and the same rigor. And that is why, we widened that stable, and now we have 4 journals within our own, so there's BMJ Open Gastroenterology, which is an open access model, Frontline Gastroenterology, which is more about practice, and then the latest one is eGastroenterology, which is an online-only journal. And that, I'm really excited about this project because it allows us collectively, as 4 journals, to kind of handle the full breadth of our specialty and offer a home seamlessly, from one to the next. So if your work was reviewed, for example, and we have the reviews and it's, just missed out, it could be cascaded to the next journal that would take care of that, be aware of those reviews and use them in their assessment, and that might shorten the period, towards publication. So I think that model works, and I know how the Lancet does it, because the Lancet editors all get together every day, just the Lancet and all of the other subspecialty Lancets, and discuss all the papers. And they say, well, this one goes there, this one, you can take this one, you can take that one. That's the kind of model that they operate. And I think it's a very efficient model.
So I think we're going to need to wrap this up. So I'm going to ask the panel to give one comment each. And it's really to address the impossible question. Will medical journals survive in the 21st century? Yes or no, and why? With your answer. Starting with Emad and going right across to the end Very brief, please. Brief, but just what you think.
Like hell, yes. Because we need it, absolutely need it.
Okay.
Yes, because we need it, but we have to be adaptable.
They will change, but will survive and may be named differently.
So I think they'll survive if they return to what they were originally, which was journals of communities. And, you know, if we look right back to the beginning of publishing, that's where journals came from. And I think that's the bit that we are not fully addressing yet.
I agree.
So with that, I'd like you to thank the panel for a brilliant discussion.